The 5th China Helicopter Exposition was recently held in the northern port city of Tianjin. Attracting over 415 exhibitors from 18 nations and regions, it was the largest one ever held. We show you some of the highlights of the expo.
China's president is making headlines with a brand new $80 million helicopter. This isn't your average ride. It's packed with cutting-edge tech, top-tier security features, and plenty of luxury. But what really has people talking is what this helicopter represents: power, ambition, and a glimpse into China's growing influence. Is it just a high-tech way to travel, or is there a deeper message behind it? Either way, this new addition to the presidential fleet is turning heads across the globe, the surprising target of China's enemies. In recent years, China's presidential helicopter has faced a staggering number of attempted attacks. Some insiders put the count at more than 40 since the turn of the decade. Each time, hostile forces tried to breach its advanced defenses, but ended up failing. This prestigious aircraft, rumored to cost tens of millions of dollars, lifts off from a special helipad not far from Zhongnanhai. It uses high-tech systems like missile jammers, decoys, and bulletproof plating that turn it into a secure airborne fortress.
Chinese fighter jet. Take a look. You can actually see it cutting right in front of a U.S. military plane.
Some say it can keep functioning during nuclear alerts while flying through extreme monsoon conditions. Officials also drop cryptic hints about hidden settings that shield the helicopter from radar and electronic snooping. They rarely talk about these features in public, which makes outsiders wonder if it really has some sort of stealth technology. The official line is that these systems are strictly classified to protect national security. But how did China's leader end up traveling around in a helicopter that seems to come straight out of a spy movie? The story goes all the way back to the dawn of the nuclear age, right after the People's Republic of China witnessed that nuclear weapons had the power to devastate massed forces on any beach or front line. Senior military figures then realized it was too dangerous to cluster troops, ships, and gear in traditional beach landings when atomic bombs could wipe them out in a single strike. This looming threat forced China's military planners to consider a faster, more flexible way of moving forces. In the late 1940s, a general named Li Mingxiao championed the idea of setting up an experimental helicopter squadron. People scoffed at these whirly-birds, especially since they looked fragile compared to heavy bombers or newly minted fighter jets. But Li Mingxiao was convinced. If an enemy tried a nuclear strike on a coastal landing zone, a helicopter force could dodge the worst of the fallout, or at least distribute troops more widely and safely. This early concept sowed the seeds of what would become the Chinese Presidential Helicopter Unit. Back then, China's newly formed military was busy acquiring hardware from various sources, and the first helicopters that landed on Chinese soil were small, basic models that carried a handful of soldiers or cargo. Technicians had to learn from scratch how to maintain the rotor systems, gearboxes, and fragile fuselages. Who would have guessed that these clumsy-looking craft would one day evolve into a fleet dedicated to transporting the head of state? Today, the Chinese president's helicopter is no longer just a test bed for nuclear-age ideas. It has turned into a flying command center, able to coordinate real-time intelligence, run government functions, and even handle emergencies if other lines of communication fail. It also keeps pace with the latest threats, whether they're mid-range missiles or sophisticated cyber interference. Every flight is a carefully choreographed operation that draws on decades of lessons, each new generation of aircraft incorporating cutting-edge materials and designs that make it harder for enemies to detect or attack.
The Chinese J-16 jet at the wing of the U.S. surveillance plane, then veering across the sky in a move known as thumping.
The early days of helicopter warfare. The military's first dedicated helicopter squadron, formed in the early 1950s, didn't start off as any sort of VIP unit. Known simply as Squadron 56, it was stationed at a small base near Tianjin so it could conduct experiments on troop transport and amphibious operations. Some of the earliest aircraft included the small YZ-3 helicopter and a slightly larger BZ-2, both made under license from foreign designs. Neither had creature comforts, no cabin heating, practically no soundproofing, and barely enough power to fly a squad of soldiers in one trip. Despite these limitations, these machines made a big impact during training exercises. Generals watched as helicopters offered a unique advantage: vertical envelopment. Instead of hitting a beach in large, predictable waves, soldiers could be dropped far behind the lines or onto challenging terrains like hillsides and forest clearings. Over time, the squadron expanded its roles to medical evacuation, reconnaissance, and delivering critical supplies during disasters. A conflict in the early 1950s tested these ideas. Although details remain classified, stories suggest that the helicopter crews of Squadron 56 flew medical teams into dangerous areas to retrieve casualties. They also helped direct artillery fire from safe vantage points in the sky. This success convinced high-level commanders that the helicopter was more than just a gadget. It was a new way of waging war, or, in peaceful times, providing emergency relief. By the end of the decade, Squadron 56 upgraded to better airframes. The YZ-4 model could lift heavier loads and navigate more challenging weather conditions. Pilots learned that swirling winds, heavy fog, and mountainous terrain demanded specialized training. Mechanical glitches were common too, especially when parts were in short supply. Yet each operational run, whether it was ferrying officials or rescuing stranded villagers during floods, brought a deeper understanding of helicopter potential. No one anticipated that, in just a few years, these same rotorcraft would be called on for a new and unexpected mission: transporting China's top leaders. It took an unforeseen crisis for the government to realize the speed and direct access helicopters could provide. A surprise mission for the president. The major turning point happened in the late 1950s, when President Chen Longwu needed to visit a remote region after a series of deadly earthquakes. The roads leading to the epicenter were in terrible shape.
China President Hu Jintao toured the quake disaster area Friday, meeting some of the stunned survivors.
And the local airstrip was barely operational due to cracks in the runway. The president's staff scrambled for alternatives. A phone call to Squadron 56's base revealed that a helicopter and crew were already on standby for cargo runs in the neighboring province. Colonel Jiang Wei, a pioneering pilot, soon found himself tasked with a mission that no one had ever practiced: flying the president to a disaster zone in a helicopter. Fuel calculations were tight, weather updates looked iffy, and many wondered if the older YZ-4 could handle the load of the president plus a small security team. Jiang Wei believed it could work if they stripped out all non-essential equipment. Sure enough, they managed to land on a makeshift pad near the affected region. The president spent hours surveying damage, meeting evacuees, and coordinating relief with local officials, then hopped back onto the helicopter for a swift return to Beijing. That single flight turned heads across the government. The notion that the president could skip roads and land almost anywhere seemed like a game changer, especially when time was critical. Soon after, top leaders requested a dedicated helicopter for domestic travel. Maintaining a stable leadership presence in emergencies became a national priority, and the stage was set for specialized presidential aviation.
Aviation analyst Captain Michael Yao Fuli says the country's lack of maintenance culture does not guarantee a new presidential aircraft will function.
By the mid-1960s, Colonel Jiang Wei was no longer just a test pilot. He was leading an initiative to outfit helicopters for high-level transport. Engineers added more comfortable seats, upgraded avionics for safer landings, and installed better communication systems so the president could stay connected to government offices while in flight. For security, they fitted bullet-resistant panels around the cabin and replaced older windows with thicker, stronger glass. This was the humble beginning of what would later be called Crane 1, the Chinese president's helicopter. General Li Mingxiao's vision. Around the same time, General Li Mingxiao, known for his earlier push into rotary wing warfare, stepped in to make Crane 1 a robust reality. He convinced the Central Military Commission that the existing helicopters were too outdated and that a new design, or at least a major upgrade, was needed to keep the president genuinely safe. Extensive discussions led to the development of a specialized version of the YZ-6 helicopter, which had better engines and improved flight stability. General Li Mingxiao also oversaw the building of new facilities near Beijing. One of these was a purpose-built helipad inside the Zhongnanhai complex. Security sweeps made sure no suspicious structures overlooked the landing site, and a discreet corridor allowed the president to move from the helicopter to the main halls without fanfare. At the same time, General Lee arranged for additional training for pilots, focusing on quick descents into cramped urban zones, nighttime operations, and evasive maneuvers against hypothetical surface-to-air missiles. In late 1969, the newly upgraded YZ-6 took off on its maiden VIP flight with the president on board. Observers noted that it flew more smoothly and generated less turbulence on landing compared to previous models. Word got around that it had radar-absorbing paint, though officials remained vague. Regardless, it was clear that Crane 1 was now equipped for bigger challenges. But even with the new model, security challenges persisted. Ensuring the president's helicopter wasn't singled out by enemies was a major focus. General Lee introduced the concept of matching helicopters. A small group of them would fly in close formation, each identical in markings and maneuvers. This tactic made it difficult for an enemy to guess which one carried the president. Over the years, it developed into a more elaborate routine that would baffle even modern surveillance: nuclear scares and the need for hardening. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, as tensions rose in various parts of the world, the question of nuclear threats loomed ever larger.
And I wonder, Mr. President, what you would say to him if he is considering using chemical or tactical nuclear weapons.
Don't.
Military planners worried about what would happen if a surprise nuclear strike disabled Beijing or major command centers. Could the president's helicopter still function if electromagnetic pulses, EMPs, knocked out regular electronics? A series of top-secret drills tested these scenarios. The unit installed EMP-resistant wiring and backup communication hubs inside the helicopter, ensuring that critical controls wouldn't fry in a nuclear blast. Engineers also rerouted certain cables through shielded channels and upgraded the pilot's instrument panel with simpler analog dials that could still work without electricity-hungry digital systems. Skeptics wondered if all these efforts were worth the cost, but supporters pointed out that a single crippling wave of electromagnetic energy could ground every unprotected aircraft in the country if it wasn't prepared. During one particularly tense phase of Sino-Soviet relations, the president's helicopter took part in an exercise that simulated large-scale nuclear disruptions. To keep things realistic, a specialized electromagnetic generator set off bursts of intense pulses. Pilots reported that their primary instruments flickered, but the backup systems handled the surge without catastrophic failure. Although details were never made public, a few team members later hinted that it was the scariest test flight of their careers, and that it proved the helicopter could keep flying under terrifying conditions. After these tests, the entire unit became even more secretive. Officials recognized that if an adversary knew how well the helicopter was protected, they might target its vulnerabilities more precisely. The helicopter's stealth factor became part of national security lore, with rumors swirling about ghost mode operations in which the helicopter barely showed up on radar. Outside experts speculated that the craft might deploy advanced radio frequency inhibitors or low observable coatings. The shift toward modern comfort and command. Even as the helicopter gathered advanced security features, it evolved into a more comfortable flying office for the nation's leader. By the 1990s, the president could hold video conferences, read classified documents on secure terminals, and speak with military commanders across the country, all from the helicopter cabin. This was a big jump from the noisy, cramped setups of the past. One key figure here was Major General Sun Yuhan, an engineer-turned-commander who believed the helicopter should be both a fortress and a boardroom. He oversaw the redesign of the interior, installing seats that absorbed rotor vibrations and dramatically improved noise insulation. Crews dismantled entire sections of the cabin to add data lines, satellite communication modules, and more intuitive lighting. By the time they finished, the helicopter had turned into something of a tech hub in the sky, allowing the president to stay connected with the State Council, the Central Military Commission, and local governments. Major General Sun also insisted on upgrading flight controls to reduce pilot workload. This included partial fly-by-wire technology that took some tasks off the pilot's shoulders, freeing them to focus on potential hazards or unexpected shifts in weather.
British military pilots being recruited by China to train PLA soldiers.
During flight tests, President Lin Yong-sheng once teased the pilots that the ride was smoother than a quick drive on a Beijing highway, which was ironically true given the city's legendary traffic. Although no official statements were released, many suspected that further stealth improvements came with these modernization efforts, possibly integrated into the fresh engine pods and tail assembly. By the late 1990s, multiple helicopters in the fleet had reached this high standard. They were collectively known as the Crane 1 Group, constantly rotated and maintained so that no single airframe was overused. Observers noticed that each helicopter had near-identical paint jobs and markings, supporting the practice of flying in groups for security. A setback and a comeback. But advanced technology can be a double-edged sword. In the early 2000s, China decided it needed a next-generation replacement for the Crane 1 Group. Various state-backed aviation firms jumped into this ambitious project, which some insiders referred to as the Azure Falcon Initiative. The aim was to build a brand-new helicopter from the ground up with even better speed, quieter rotors, and superlative electronic defenses. Costs, however, soared. Timeframes slipped. Early prototypes reportedly had trouble stabilizing in high-altitude tests near Tibet, and the flight control software had persistent bugs. In 2007, rumors spread that the entire Azure Falcon project was at risk of cancellation. Engineers frantically tried to solve mechanical issues and reconcile conflicting demands from different government agencies. Something had to give. By 2009, top officials pulled the plug on the large-scale plan. Billions of yuan had been spent with little to show beyond a few half-functional prototypes and some interesting data. This left the existing Crane 1 Group, already aging, in a difficult spot. The unit had no immediate replacement. Pilots joked that they might start scrounging parts from museum pieces. Behind the scenes, the team launched an all-out push to keep the older helicopters mission-ready. They formed a partnership with advanced manufacturing firms in Shenzhen, exploring the idea of 3D printing certain spare parts that were no longer in production. They also struck deals with private research labs to produce specialized composites for rotor blades. By 2012, the extended maintenance and modernization efforts paid off. The Crane 1 Group was still in service and even more technologically refined than before, bridging the gap until another plan to replace or upgrade them emerged. The last major disaster warning was given less than a month ago, and the resulting flood was so severe that it buried most of the lower streets under running rivers, powerful enough to sweep off many cars in its path. What was the cause of this disaster, and what makes it so unique? Join us as we examine the recent flood that sunk Dubai over 3 meters deep. The unexpected flood. On January 3rd, just a few days into the new year, the Dubai police notified the public of a sudden flood sweeping hundreds of cars across multiple routes in the city. The floods were so drastic that many motorists had to use special routes to avoid getting swept away by the running waters, and as a result, these roads quickly became busy from immense traffic. Among these roads were the famous Emirates and metro pathways.
Flights at Dubai International Airport are being diverted following heavy rainfall and major flooding.
Unlike most of the roads that recently got flooded in Saudi Arabia, these routes had drainage systems built in to prevent intense flooding. So while most lower routes like the Al Nada and Ittihad roads sunk under over 3 meters of water, many civilians were still able to move along the higher roads leading to safer areas. Sadly, that wasn't the end of the story, as there were many more problems on the horizon. As if traffic congestions weren't bad enough, the higher roads were also flooded, albeit not as much as the lower pathways, with water levels high enough for the authorities to reduce the speed limit by a huge margin to prevent accidents. Rain fell across Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and other areas of the Emirates that morning. Realizing how the situation was only getting worse, the authorities gave more warnings for high winds and sea storms in the coming hours. It started as a slight rain that began shortly after 4 a.m. in Dubai and slowly got worse as time went by. building up as growing clouds moved from the seas through the previous night. While the loss of property wasn't very significant, many saw it as a divine sign hinting at a much bigger disaster coming later this year. To find out why, let's step back to a similar event that occurred in Dubai at about the same time last year that led to something much worse: the Persian Gulf floods. January 3rd last year was another frightening day for meteorologists at the UAE Storm Center, as many signs hinted at a possible flood occurring in a matter of days, but there wasn't enough evidence to prove it. But that didn't stop them from telling everyone about it. Sadly, this concern didn't go beyond the walls of the research center, as many people were too busy to plan for an event the experts weren't even sure about. With this in mind, it was business as usual until the evening of January 14th, when a light rain fell across the city into the night. Many saw it as a refreshing break from the long drought, marking the start of the long-awaited rainy season, as it was for certain years. According to immediate weather forecasts, this rain was expected to end before daybreak, but it proved them wrong by growing more intense with each passing hour. By noon the following day, the rain had only gotten worse. Roads were flooded, and many schools and businesses couldn't open for the day. All flights were either delayed or canceled, and experts called it the city's heaviest rainfall in over half a century.
Hundreds and thousands of other passengers just like me in this airport who have been waiting for 10 hours, 16 hours, some even for 24 to 30 hours.
The storm ended 2 days after it started, and experts believe it was caused by the low pressures moving south from the Red Sea. This brought in a lot of moist air to the region. Add this to the already warm waters of the Persian Gulf, and we have the perfect recipe for a long thunderstorm that could last for days. It was a great lesson for experts and average civilians alike, a warning that things weren't always as they seemed when it came to the region's climate. This meant weather forecasts could be wrong a lot of the time, and people would do well to prepare for something like this in the coming years. What the experts didn't know was that the short flood was only a warning sign that hinted at a much bigger disaster set to happen in just a few months.
Tonight, Dubai is cleaning up from the chaos and bracing for more extreme weather to come.
This happened on April 16th, the day when Dubai and many other parts of the UAE were greeted with a much bigger storm. Unlike the last one, the rains this time were much heavier. The floods were so bad that CNN called it a year's worth of rain happening in a single day. It affected all 7 emirates, caused by bigger moist winds arriving from the Persian Gulf. It was also a huge blow to the city's economy, with total damages costing over $2 billion to fix. The UAE, at this point, had done its best to build high roads that could handle floods like this, but this proved that there was still a lot to be done. To make up for this, the leaders announced a new project that promised to increase the city's drainage capacity by over 700%. While these steps are commendable, they did little to stop the more recent flood of January 3rd, and with similar signs now hinting at a much greater flood this year, many believe Saudi Arabia's recent floods are about to happen once again, this time in Dubai. Here is how. A warning from Saudi Arabia. On the dry, cold morning of January 6th, the National Meteorological Center issued multiple red alerts to warn civilians about upcoming rains heavy enough to cause a great flood. This warning came just 3 days after the flash flood that recently occurred in Dubai, and just as they predicted, the intense rain started the following evening. The resulting flood was severe, covering many cities, including Mecca, Medina, and Jeddah. In a matter of hours, the busy streets turned into running rivers, with the highest rainfall happening at Al-Shafia, a region in Badr Governorate, followed by Jeddah's Al-Basatin with a slight difference. Just like the similar Persian Gulf flood, this too was caused by low pressures moving moist and warm air from the Red Sea. Whole cars with people inside were swept like weightless balloons, making many wonder if places like Mecca even had a drainage system. The storm was so great that it brought up a religious controversy on the true cause of the event. While some believed it could be explained by natural means, as it had always been with floods in the past, others believed it was a purely supernatural event. Some of them argued that God sent the flood to change the city to a vast green meadow, while the rest interpreted the event as a sign of coming judgment. Despite this, after the storm was over, many experts at the National Meteorological Center got to work immediately to find natural causes behind the storm they weren't aware of. Sure, they already knew it was caused by low pressures and warm air, but after seeing how much damage this caused, they had to know if there was something they could do to prevent it from happening again. After weeks of careful research, they found out that warmer temperatures in the atmosphere allow larger storm clouds to form. This, according to the experts, leads to longer and much heavier rainfall, especially after extended periods of heat and drought. The previous years showed a growing pattern of floods happening at various places in the east at the same time of year at an increasing rate. Based on all they put together, it simply meant the rising temperatures each year were the main cause of the floods occurring every January. This pointed back to the issue that had plagued the minds of scientists for decades, and that huge problem was climate change. Though this was a great discovery, it left a better taste in the mouths of everyone involved. This was because while it showed that humans could do something to prevent or reduce the rate of these disasters, it also showed that mankind was the culprit. This was a huge pill to swallow, especially considering how many lives and properties were lost because of these disasters. But that wasn't the worst part. A closer inspection of all that happened showed that the climate patterns behind the flooding in Saudi Arabia are very similar to those affecting Dubai in recent years. For one, both regions are very prone to extreme weather conditions. Wet seasons come with very cold temperatures and flooded streets, while dry seasons often come with much hotter days and dusty evenings. Climate change in recent years only widens the gap between these extremes, causing longer and heavier rains to happen every new year after much hotter periods of drought. Though we now know the main cause behind these events, the problem is that it cannot be solved very easily. Mankind has wrestled with the issue of climate change for decades, and the end of the struggle is nowhere on the horizon. The best thing Dubai's leaders can do for now is prepare, and according to the experts, here is what they can expect. The next great flood. With Saudi Arabia serving as a warning for Dubai's future in the coming months, it is safe to expect the same conditions the next time it happens.
Welcome back. Now, Dubai, a city in the desert that is proud of its modern gloss, is facing the towering task of clearing up its waterlogged roads and drying out the flooded homes 2 days after record storm.
After all, Dubai is located at a place where low-pressure systems bring warm air from surrounding waters at least once a year. Many ongoing projects are put in place to make the city more urbanized, and that is part of the problem. By building new platforms over natural areas and replacing natural drainage systems with less capable artificial ones, and rainfall increasing every year, even the current improved drainage systems wouldn't be able to catch up. There's also the fact that while the Tazreef project promises to increase drainage by 700% in 2033, it comes with many problems that make it almost impossible to achieve. First off, despite how advanced the city is in technology, the truth remains that projects like this require the kind of equipment that usually doesn't meet deadlines. This means the 9-year project expected to end by late 2033 would likely take at least 2 more years to finish, thereby defeating the purpose of having a strict timeline to work with. Secondly, even though the project sticks to the 9-year plan, let's not forget that the increasing rain in the coming years won't wait for the project to reach completion. 9 years is enough time to flood the city several times over, especially when the rains are only getting heavier. Let's also not forget that large-scale projects like this always affect natural ecosystems and the animals that live in them. The tools used to do this also leave a high carbon footprint, contributing even more to the existing problem that causes increased flooding each year. It would also cause problems for the yearly budgets to come, as the money that could be used for restoring lost properties from upcoming floods would have to be used for the ongoing project. Each flood would be greater than the previous one. The next one, expected to hit later this year or in early 2026, would affect a lot of things, including the city's roads, buildings, and public services. Many roads would be closed, public transport would be almost non-existent, and emergency services might take too long to respond. Many could lose their businesses, and the economy would face a much bigger hit than the one it's still recovering from. All these things could happen if the city doesn't invest more in their drainage systems with a much shorter plan in the coming months. While it might cost a lot at first, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.